Hey, welcome back. Thanks for joining me. I've got a couple of cool little Peerless tweeters. I'm going to try to bring them up close to the camera so you can see them. It's a DX20BF0008. Not sure if the camera will focus on that or not, but there you go. All right, so the reason I chose these tweeters is because primarily the size of this hole. I didn't want to try to modify the holes in these RCA cabinets any more than I have to. And so with this tweeter, when I found this one, the specs looked good to me, and it will fit through the hole and cover up these screw holes from that tweeter. So last video, I had put in these super cool Dayton Classic 12-inch woofers. So far, for 50 bucks a pop, I'm really happy with them. I mean, they sound good. They really do. And even though this box is probably a good half foot to 3/4 foot too small for that driver, it still seems to perform fine. So it's a really well-behaved speaker. And it does get a little bit louder than the original woofers that came out of there. It also took care of a problem I had with the original RCA woofer, which when we measure them, their characteristic is fairly similar. You know, probably a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're in the same cabinet. But that being said, this one really, man, when there'd be a lot of musical information coming out, like these tended to get kind of confused or sloppy. The sound started getting a little funky. These ones here are just really dynamic. They're punchy, and it seems like no matter what is being thrown at them, they just deliver it. So I think that's probably the biggest difference between this stock RCA woofer, a RadioShack RCA Optimus woofer. They reach down deep. I got no complaints about them. I think that was $50 well spent. Could I have spent more, double that plus some, to get the Dayton, I think they're called the Designer Series? Yes, I could have done that. But that would have thrown me over my intended budget for this build, which is roughly $200. So I really want to stay under $200 with this build. Hopefully what I'll wind up with is a speaker system that I've invested $200 in that will be on par with speaker systems costing many times that much. That's the goal. I'm going to try to break up a lot of these videos into different little segments so that, you know, I started with the woofers. Like, what happens when we take a stock cabinet and we just put a different woofer in it? That's it. Everything else is the way it was. Did that in the last video. Next, I'm going to do probably the next logical thing that someone might have to address on a vintage set of speakers, which is the tweeter. So vintage speakers have a tendency, even back in the day, they had a tendency to do this. Woofers would go out due to dry rot or from distortion. Tweeters would go out from being overpowered and having like a first order crossover most of the time, sometimes a second order, and crossed over too low. So tweeters used to burn out all the time back in the day. And as they age, obviously you've got the same problem from decades ago, but now they're older, right? So that problem becomes more apparent. So it's not uncommon to buy a vintage set of speakers and you turn them on and they work, and then you start listening to music and turn it up, and then, you know, one of the tweeters goes. So a tweeter replacement might be something that's very common to do on these. And it's not like I'm dealing with some kind of, you know, a special JBL or Infinity speaker. These Optimus / RCA speakers are just, you know, that's RadioShack's answer to the loudspeaker world. And so they've got, you know, probably very generic style drivers that were built for them or, you know, sold to them in bulk. Peerless tweeters that I want to put in here are much better built. That is a silk 3/4 inch dome with a dual magnet structure. Yeah. So I think that these are probably a better quality tweeter than that. So it doesn't break my heart to try to swap it out. And like I say, after, you know, when you have vintage speakers, you're either going to be replacing one of these two things first, either the woofer or the tweeter. One of those things you're going to have to replace eventually. So I've taken care of the woofers. Next, let's put the tweeters in and see what happens. To do this fairly, so that we can see and maybe hear a difference, we'll run a full sweep, see where the speakers are at now, and probably we can measure 2 speakers together and each speaker individually. Later this afternoon, I'm going to be bringing the cabinets to my son's house, and we can cut up the internal bracing and gussets. Because next week, you know, I'll be able to now have those things braced up and insulation in them and all the really kind of obvious rudimentary things that I should have taken care of first. But you know, that's for a typical like resto mod speaker project. Is you gut them, you do all your changes and start tweaking and fine tuning. And that's kind of the way I did those big speakers in back there, in back. Just to show you the size difference of these. It really cracks me up. When I see this in the videos, I see these big speakers sitting next to the little guys. Yeah, those those are some big speakers, man. If you have not watched the videos of me redoing these speakers, check them out. Some of them, you know, are probably way too long and boring. Other ones are kind of cool, but yeah, that was a really good project. Turned out well, sounds good. So I'm hoping that these sound as good or better. I don't know if they'll sound better, but they'll probably sound good. All right, so first things first, trying to pack in a lot today, wrap it up so that I can gut them again, work on the internal gussets and bracing, and then start putting more components back into them. So that'll be next week when I'm actually doing a little bit more with these. But for today, I want to try to just bust through a few common things, like what happens if I change a tweeter, what happens if I change a mid-range, what does it sound like, would I even need to do that? Yeah, so anyway, let's get started, and I'll kind of stop and I'll move really fast with this corny music in the background, and then when I find something interesting to say, I'll try to let you know what it is. After watching back on some of my videos, I've got some really bad habits I'm trying to break, try not to bore you to death with. I know I say so a lot. I do this thing where I go, I don't know why I do it. It's just complete habit. I never even noticed I did it before. I get off on tangents, just like I'm doing now. So sorry. All right, I better just get rolling, man. Thanks for hanging in there with me, okay? Oh, wait a minute. I wanted to run a frequency sweep first, didn't I? Let me do that. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Keep me on track. Turn down the system volume initially and increase as needed. Don't blow out your eardrums. I've been learning a lot about room reverberations and that kind of thing from a guy named Jeff that I had mentioned in a previous video. Guy's really smart with like audio sound reproduction and how it reacts in rooms and stuff. Anyway, I'm not too worried about the way I'm testing these right now because it's kind of a smaller room, maybe, I don't know, 12 by 12, 12 by 14, something like that. And it's not treated for sound, but it's got some things in here to at least diffract sound, meaning, you know, get going in a different direction, try to break up that frequency. Because from what he's taught, essentially these audio signals are kind of pumping. So they're pushing, pulling, pushing, pulling, pushing, right? And you get these waves going. These bass waves are, you know, high frequency waves or whatever waves they are, right? He's usually demonstrating with the bigger waves because they're easier to talk about and see. But the point is that like in a larger room or something like that, I might have a lot of issues trying to measure as, you know, sound is being reflected and then returning at a different time, or being in a completely blank, empty room where, like right now, my voice would sound completely different than what it does. So I'm not so worried about it. I'm just trying to see, you know, is it going to make some kind of a difference in a frequency response or listening? We'll switch in the woofer, we'll switch in the tweeter, make a difference. So the fact that this is not a perfect laboratory environment, you know what? For what we're doing, a $200 pair of $200 pair of fun speakers, I really am not overly concerned about that. So I think what I have going on here is sufficient enough to gain an understanding of the basic profile of the speaker intuitively, and also do some adjustments and tweaking to improve that. And, you know, yes, it's in just this one single room, this one single listening environment. And I'll try it, measuring them in different, you know, areas, different rooms of the house and stuff, but I think is probably fairly representative of a lot of room sizes or listening areas, because most people do that at home, and you know, not everybody has a 5,000 square foot house with 30 by 30 rooms in it, right? So a lot of us are in smaller rooms, or we might have a larger living or family room that's only partially dedicated to, say, home theater or stereo. But so anyway, I'm not super worried about the way I'm testing it. More than anything, I'm just I'm looking for patterns, I'm looking for changes, things of that nature. So it's not so much about exactly what the graph is showing, but what it's doing. All right, let's get going. Stop rambling. So volume, let's go. Let's see, this is digital. So I'm going to go with negative 20 dB. I'm going to go ahead and reset this, and maybe I can get this to where you can see it. For this initial frequency test, I'm going to try a long sweep, which is a, you know, full frequency sweep that is a little bit extended. It's a little bit longer than the just whoop. I'm going to pick all channels, which right now on my NAD receiver, the only two channels that are hooked up are these two, and they are set to the same decibel level output and distance. So they should be fairly equal. Where we're at right now. This is in 10 dB increments this way. Then we got our octaves down here, away from 20 to 20,000 hertz. Looks pretty good. What we're going to be looking at more today is the high end. And right now this is where our highest point looks to be, about 8250. I want it smooth, and I'd like to see it at approximately the same volume as the other ones. So let's see if we can get that accomplished, or at least what changing the tweeter is actually going to do. My Home Chef speaker boxes are not very stable. You know what I did is for messing around with these bigger speakers that I don't have dedicated stands for, is I recently ordered up a couple of like little they're step stools technically. They're a little bit taller though. They're like 13 inches tall. It's a twin pack for, I don't know, 20 bucks or something from Amazon. So they should be a little bit sturdier. They're supposed to hold up to 300 pounds a piece. The only reason these Home Chef boxes are holding these things up, I think, at this point is simply divine intervention, because I mean, these things are pretty old. They're several months old. They've delivered food in them. I've been setting speakers on them, including these big old, you know, probably 70-pound 15-inch three-ways. So yeah, they're holding up pretty good, but they're gonna wear out. I might as well show you the difference between these guys. Turn on the light so you can see this better. So that's the original. This is the one that's going in there. Tweeter. This one you have to guess it's a tweeter. See, this one's nice because it tells you it's a tweeter. No mistaking it. Okay, the tweeters are in. I'm gonna let these warm up a little bit. These are brand new tweeters, never been used. I'm old school. I believe that it's important for electrical components, electromechanical components, to break in a little bit before you go, you know, go nuts with them. There's, you know, two sides to everything. There's three sides actually. There's the truth, and then there's, you know, this opinion and that opinion. But so there's this big argument going on. If you don't know about it, it's been going on for eons, and it's whether or not you need to burn in speakers. I grew up back in the day when they preached it from soapboxes, man. Let them burn in, right? And a lot of speaker manufacturers still, to this day, put right on there. Make sure that you warm it up for at least 20 hours, 100 hours, whatever, right? And so, yeah, but then there's the other bunch that say, it doesn't matter, like it's just electrical and it's never gonna change, and they got a gazillion textbook reasons why not, but just common sense tells me, hey, if I just dumped a bunch of money putting in brand new speakers, I want to take every precaution possible that I know of, whether it works or not works, to preserve their life. Because I don't want to go smoking a woofer or a tweeter just because I get stupid and put them in a cabinet and crank up the music right away. Anyway, so yeah, I'm going to just pause the video for a minute and then go ahead and listen to a little bit of music over these. I might as well turn it on while you're here to witness it yourself. So this is the first time I've ever heard these tweeters. First time they've ever been hooked up. Set at the same minus 20 dB. Try to pick out a few songs. since we're measuring the tweeter, I'll probably get it really close. I'll get it so that it's kind of at the same height as the tweeter. That's pretty close. It looks like I'm trying to get these things about 3 feet away. I don't really care what the distance is as long as I make sure I repeat it each time. Things out of the way a little bit too. They sound good so far. They have a much more refined sound to them than those plastic tweeters did. I think that should get us in the ballpark. Tweeters, and man, I'll tell you what, already it's a dramatic improvement over those stock RadioShack tweeters. Wow, what a difference. I don't know what they're going to measure like, but if you ask me how they sound really good. Sound really nice. As a matter of fact, they kind of remind me of a cross between the phenolic ring cone tweeter that's in that big cabinet and the 1 1/8" dome tweeter that I tried to use in it. It's got some nice high sounds to it, sparkly, but not doesn't have semblance, you know, it's not like like driving me nuts. But it's silky smooth, man. It's really smooth sounding. I don't know how the frequency response will be. That might suck, but it sounds great.
You were the life for certain of my life. You were simply my beloved wife.
Nice. Nice and punchy. Move this camera down where you can see things better. And you're about ear level with me right now. These aren't towed in for me right now. These are towed in for the microphone.
Life walked these streets of virtuous state. It seemed to me, makeup on their faces, actors took their places next to me. Life walked these streets in a carnival of sights to see. All the cheap thrill seekers, vendors and the dealers, they crowded around me. Have I been blind? Have I been lost inside myself and my own mind? Hypnotized, mesmerized by what my eyes have seen. Life walked these streets in a spectacle of wealth and poverty.
not sure if you remember from a few videos ago when I was testing these with their stock speakers. This song, I couldn't even listen to it. It was so nasty sounding. With these speakers, it's sounding pretty good.
Done so many things wrong. I don't know if I can do right. Done so many things wrong. I don't know if I can do right. This point in my life, done so many things wrong. Don't know if I can do right. Put your trust in me. Hope I won't let you down. Give me a chance. I'll try. See, it's been a hard road, the road I'm traveling on. If I take your hand, might lead you down the path to ruin. Had a hard life, just say so you understand. Oh, right now, doing the best I can.
Wow, that's a huge difference in soundstage compared to the original RadioShack woofer and tweeter that were in that box. It's still the same mid-range, but based on that graph, it looks like the mid-range is actually behaving fairly well. And the frequency response right now, even with the cheap RCA RadioShack little tiny crossovers in there, it's not horrible. And it sounds pretty darn good. I'll tell you what, for a cheap upgrade, you probably just take these stock cabinets, put in a set of these woofers, a pair of these woofers and a pair of those tweeters, and have a pretty decent sounding set of speakers. I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, I wouldn't have to do much more to these to make them sound, they sound nice the way they are. I'm sure that they'll sound better by the time I get done with them. But for right now, they're pretty nice to listen to. I'm just going to pause this for a minute and try to work my way around to you. I'll try to slip in a screenshot of this here. And the reason being is what you're seeing is a frequency response line, that red hold line that's not from frequency sweep. That is from listening to various sources of playback material. So in this case, it's going over digital into that receiver via HDMI, playing it on an old NAD DVD CD player. It's an old ripped CD from 20 plus years ago with a variety of different songs. And they have primarily real instruments in them. They are all studio recorded as far as I can tell, but it gives us a good mix so that we can try to form a bass line that is built from literally the music that we're listening to, so that we see this in-room response with these speakers, what we're actually winding up with as a profile for these speakers. So in this case, it's, picking up at 40 hertz right in here, which most music isn't going to go a whole lot lower than 40 hertz anyway. So when it's hitting 40 hertz, that's kind of a big deal. And then we're running all the way across here through the tweeter. And you can tell the profile of this is that the mid-range and the woofer are almost the same sound pressure level, give or take a few dB. And then it looks like once that mid-range starts running out of steam and the tweeter picks up, it's, got this kind of suck out, and then it's still nice and flat and smooth, but it's a little bit lower in sound pressure level. So right now that's the character of the speaker. And as I play different tracks, you'll be able to see this form. I think probably what I'll do is just play a couple more tracks, partial tracks, get that bass line established, and then go ahead and do a frequency sweep just to see how close a full-blown frequency sweep is to what we built with our music.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Take shelter on my front porch, landing
All right, so there's our established hold line from playing a variety of music, all at the same level. And so with all those different musical instruments, voices, etc., this is what we wound up with as what we're hearing back as a profile or character of these speakers, which is luckily on this one, it's fairly easy to see. It's already pretty flat for a DIY set of speakers. Maybe in large part to do with the drivers, those replacement drivers that I put in. The Dayton Classic woofers have been around a long time. They're probably pretty well dialed in, I would think. And of course, Peerless by Timpani, that name doesn't need any introduction. They make really nice tweeters. So all I can say is so far, so good. I'm going to run a frequency sweep now and see how it tracks against that line that we've established. And before we get started with this frequency sweep, I will point out a few things that I noticed while the music was playing, and maybe you noticed it too. But basically, I'll show you in a few areas here. All right, so that's 40, 50. It does peak at 50, so that's kind of cool. It's a nice spot to peak at. Now this woofer should be operating all the way to at least in this range, I would think. At least near 1,000, I would think. Could be wrong. Could even have, maybe the crossover from the factory is set up in here somewhere. I don't think it would be that low, but it's possible. And I'll kind of explain that really quickly too, is that with vintage speakers in particular, they weren't mass produced on a scale that they are today. And the automation wasn't what it is today either. The cost of components back in the day, they used to try to get as much out of them as they could, extract as much out of them as they could without dumping a lot of money into them, right? And I'm talking commercial speakers like the RadioShack speakers, or even the better brands like Sound Dynamics and Energy and stuff. So if you wanted to cross over that woofer really low, that would be a more costly inductor or choke coil that they would have to buy. But they're not buying it just once like we would, right? So the difference between a $2 part and a $7 part to us doesn't make that big a difference. If we wanted to cross over at 500 instead of 700, that's not a huge deal, right? But to them, if they're planning on making 100,000 of these, that's a big chunk of change. Point being is that typically the woofers would extend on up as high as they could go with a reasonable frequency response. As a matter of fact, some manufacturers, Sound Dynamics is one I can think of in particular, a lot of their speakers were run without any kind of a choke coil or filter on the woofer. So they just let it run until it couldn't run anymore, so to its highest frequency, and then they would cross over to the tweeter. So that being said, I'm assuming that what we're seeing here for the most part over that 40 to 1,000 hertz range is most likely the woofer, most likely. The next thing I'm going to try is switching to mid-range anyway, so I guess we'll find out real quick if these change out, if these crossover points are more noticeable, especially with the new mid-range. Maybe I'll try to mark the screen or something before I do it just to show where it's changing at. But as far as running a frequency sweep, I'm going to run a long sweep against this line that we've established from the music and see how close it actually is. Now, the volume between the test DVD and that burned CD that I just played music on, the playback level may be a little bit different. So the main thing we're trying to track is the actual, is it tracking the same? Even if it's a little louder or a little quieter than what's on here, is it tracking the same? So let's check that out. And this is a complete curiosity thing. I think that we're going to find that it's pretty close. This could be a moment where I eat a size 13 and I am wrong, but that's what I think is going to happen. Let's find out. It was at minus 20 dB, and I just double checked it to make sure that's where it was. Next, I'm going to go ahead and run over to our long sweep. I'm going to choose all channels, which is the left and right. Okay, are you ready? Let's see what happens. I think you could say I was pretty much right. It's got the same character signature. So playing back that music, the only thing that this really actually revealed more than the music did was the potential of this tweeter, which is, it's pretty substantial, up to 10,000, and for all intents and purposes, anything over 10,000 is, how important it is kind of debatable, because personally, for me, I can't hear past, say, 13,000 hertz at all. After 13,000, it becomes completely silent to me. So anything past 10,000 to me is actually, it's not going to be super critical, but you can see that this is where it actually tends to drop off at, is the 10,000 hertz range. The good news is that it's still tracking a fairly equal decibel level, so that's really good. And I'm going to move this over here and try to pick out a couple of high spots. So let's call this, say that would be the tweeter. All right, that's probably the high spot of the tweeter. I'm guessing our mid-range is somewhere in this area. Let's just say it's at 1,000, just for snicks and giggles. So if that's true, that means that the lower points of the woofer would be in here. And I think that that's the woofer causing that, but we'll find out for sure. All right, so what's next? We figured out what our tweeters are doing. They sound wonderful. They're measuring fairly well. Next, I'll swap out these mid-ranges and see what happens. I thought of a little experiment that might be kind of cool just to throw in, call it a value-added bonus, if you will. But I'm going to try to disconnect this tweeter and see what it sounds like, or see how it measures, I should say, not what it sounds like. I'm not going to listen to music like this, but I'm going to run a sweep. What I want to see is if we can tell where the crossover points are at of the existing crossover that's in here. Now normally I would not try this because I know from experience that when you have all the drivers hooked up to the crossover, the entire thing behaves differently than when you only have a couple of drivers hooked up. So by us having these disconnected, we may wind up with a result that is less than accurate. But I do want to see if it's rolling off that woofer and where it's rolling it off at. And same with the tweeter. See if we can find out, establish where that mid-range area is. Theoretically, I could put an 8 ohm resistor in between these two if I had it to complete the circuit, but I do not actually have one because I used them all on the other speakers. So we're just going to have to try it like this. Let's put this in here where I can find it again. And let's just go ahead and close this hole up. We'll run one speaker just to see what it looks like. We don't need to do both of them. The point of this exercise is to see if we can isolate our mid-range, since we're getting ready to change a mid-range. And in my opinion, it's the mid-range that is most it's least likely to get changed for a variety of reasons. One, it's hard to find mid-ranges that fit certain size holes that are already there for mid-ranges on a three-way system. The second thing is that besides the holes being a little bit different, there's not a ton of mid-ranges out there. I mean, you're going to find all kinds of woofers and all kinds of tweeters, but finding dedicated mid-ranges is pretty hard. There's a limited selection. Now you can use a full range speaker or a woofer with an extended frequency response, but it's not, to me it's a little bit cumbersome. That's what I did in the 15-inch three-way project, is that I had actually used a full range PA speaker for my mid-range. I chose a PA speaker assuming for public address that it would have the best frequency response in that vocal region. But I did have to build a chamber for it, which that's something that not a lot of guys are probably interested in doing, is putting a dedicated chamber, which is nothing more than like a miniature speaker enclosure inside the existing cabinet. I don't think most guys would do that. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. I did it on that one for two purposes, to brace it up as well as give it a chamber. But it's more likely that when somebody is swapping out a mid-range driver, they're going to be working with a sealed mid-range, meaning the back is closed off. They don't need a chamber. Now those come in a couple different fashions. You know, they come in the cone style like this, that almost all look very similar to this. Either that or they'll have a surround on them, like this one that I purchased to try on here. But it's the same concept, it's a closed back. They also make dome mid-ranges, which is like a giant tweeter, except it's here. But again, finding one that suits your needs, is the correct impedance or resistance, nominal impedance. Yeah, that's hard to find. So you don't have it's slim pickings when it comes to mid-ranges. If you speaker companies are listening, the people that make transducers, make some more mid-ranges, please. We need them. Anyway, I'm going to see what happens with just this one speaker now in its current state. I'll point the mic at it and turn the camera a little bit so you can see. I'm just doing the right front. Okay, well that's just plain weird. this mid-range is not even connected. And we are seeing a frequency response like that. That's really weird. Without a mid-range in it. That makes zero sense to me. Let me try just one more time to make sure. I mean, you saw me. I disconnected the wires on the mid-range. They are not hooked up. Okay, we're going to go to the right front. There it is, though. You're seeing it. Not a huge difference even without a mid-range. I mean, technically, I could probably play music back on that speaker and it wouldn't even sound that strange. Let's see what the other speaker does with mid-range connected. So this in here changed quite a bit. So we'll take a picture with and without. That's pretty wild how little influence that actually has with it completely disconnected. We are still looking at a fairly respectable frequency response. Unbelievable. It'll be interesting to see what happens when I start messing with the crossover. But first, let's see what happens when I connect that other mid-range. Well, one thing I might mention, I just thought of it, is especially you guys or gals that have messed with a lot of speakers, you might be like, wow, that guy really took a chance, you know, putting a brand new tweeter into a box with an existing crossover, because if it was crossed over too low and I was playing music, especially, you know, if it was loud, right, it may have too low of an extension on that tweeter. This one here I'm not too worried about. With three-way cabinets, you have a lot more leeway because most often the tweeter section is up pretty high. Where it would make a big difference is on a two-way, because if you have a two-way system, say it was crossed over at, I don't know, 1500 hertz, like for whatever reason that vintage speaker used a tweeter in a two-way configuration that could reach down that low, right? And then you go and put in a tweeter that should be crossed over at, I don't know, pick a number, 3500 hertz, right? You could easily damage that tweeter. So on a two-way system, you definitely want to be careful when you're just putting a tweeter into an existing configuration with a crossover network in there. Make sure your crossover point is correct, or at least within some reasonable range. As you can see, I mean, even without the mid-range connected, it's not like it makes this world of difference. Like, you know, if you get a tweeter that should be crossed over at 3500 and you're crossing it over at 2500, is it going to make that huge difference? In a three-way configuration, probably not. All right, this is that new Goldwood mid-range that was suggested to me by a YouTube viewer, so I figured I'd give it a try. The only downside to it is that it got bent in shipping, so I've got to try to straighten it out a little bit before I go sticking it in the cabinet. If Parts Express, if you're listening or watching this video, please package these Goldwood speakers better. This thing was just flopping around inside a box and it went right through the side of it. This is another one I'm going to need a jumper for too. So here's what I did essentially, is I made this jumper wire. So it's got the male end here and the female end here. And that is because this speaker, the new Goldwood, has two equally sized terminals on it. So I know that in the old one, the smaller terminal that was coming off the back of the speaker was for the negative. So I'm going to hook up my jumper onto the negative, which is this one here. Okay, so now I'm all ready to put it in the cabinet. Here's my negative. Positive. And let's put it in there. Okay, mid-range is in. The only thing that I will say here is that the way this RadioShack speaker was originally wired up was with all the positive leads from the crossover going to the positives on each driver. So oftentimes in a three-way system, the mid-range, the polarity is reversed. That's what I actually did on the big speakers behind this one, is I reversed that polarity. When the polarity is not reversed, what I experienced on the other speakers is that I had this enormous boost in mid-range, like literally like 6 dB boost across the mid-range. And by reversing the polarity, it brought that back down level with the rest of the speakers. And that the speakers in that other cabinet were all very similar in terms of efficiency. So theoretically, they should have been, equal. But it's not uncommon for a mid-range in a three-way system to be a hot spot. It's they can run a little hot in that mid-range area. So I'm not sure if we're gonna have to end up reversing this polarity with the other crossover or not, but for this test, for this purpose, I just hooked it up just like you would at home, or somebody that maybe you didn't think about like phase polarity and reversing the polarity and things like that, right? You're just gonna hook it up the way it was hooked up. So that's how I hooked it up. The good news for me anyway is that it's not like a super dramatic difference in terms of sound pressure level. It's a little bit more, but not a ton more. It doesn't have a super smooth frequency response, that's for sure, but I am anxious to hear how it sounds. I'm going to run a full sweep with both speakers when I have the other mid-range in that cabinet. So let's go ahead and do that and then see where we wind up. And I've already made it easy by doing my jumper wire for that one too. not a whole lot of change right off the bat as far as I can see, but you know, when I am able to kind of look at them side by side, or flip back and forth, I could probably see some differences. Right now we're tracking pretty even though, so I'm glad, because one of my big concerns was that this tweeter's efficiency level was so much higher. It was 6 dB higher than even the woofer. So I was afraid that it might overpower everything. But it doesn't look like it's behaving that way. And it might be because it's crossed over, you know, before its nasty little peak toward the tail end there, which is kind of inherent of a closed mid-range design. Oftentimes the impedance is very high toward that lower end, and without a crossover it can exhibit this huge spike in SPL at that area. So at any rate, this one is behaving pretty well. So now I'm ready to listen to some music. Well, it might be a placebo effect, but they sound pretty good.
so many things wrong. I don't know if I can do right. I've done so many things wrong. I don't know if I can do right.
Well, I think that's a wrap for this part of this, and so far so good. The mid-ranges, they do sound different. I'm having trouble kind of nailing it down, putting it into words. It looks like they're made out of, like the cone is plastic. I don't know if that's what's giving them the kind of a different, it's probably what's giving them a different sound, because the output level and the frequency response is pretty similar to the other mid-range that was in there, but it does have a different tone to it. I'm not entirely sure I like it. I'll probably have to give it some long-term listening to see if I like it or not. Yeah, it's hard to put into words, but it does sound different. I'm not sure that it sounds better or worse, but it does sound different. That being said, I'll call this one a wrap. You got to see a whole bunch of stuff today, and like I say, I'm gonna gut these cabinets. I've got to get over to my son's house where he's got a nice saw where I can go cutting up wood, and I'm gonna bring an empty cabinet with me to make sure that we're, fitting all these things the way that they should fit. There's a lot less messing around I got to do when I'm trying to put them together. Catch you later. So I'm with my son. We're cutting up wood for the speakers. This is what I got going on here so far. Kind of playing a couple of verticals in here, and then we're cutting up the side to sides, and then the front to back. Curtis, what kind of saw is that? What do you call it?
It's a miter saw.
Miter saw. All right, so the plan is we're going to have these guys in here. Now these my son cut 13 3/4, which is just a shade too tight. And I don't want to wedge it in there because these cabinets are so cheap I might blow apart the sides. So probably what we'll need to do is just shave a tiny bit of this off of there. Trim that down a little bit. Nope, that works. That fits. Perfect. All right, cool. So now we're going to do the front to back.
Front to back is what?
That is, we had 10 1/4. Yep.
Depth.
Yep. 10.
So that's the one I just cut you.
No, you did 13 13.
Oh, 10 1/4. Okay. So this thing. It'll do with both. 10 1/4.
Yes. And if you want to just tell,
I trust the tape measure.
okay, he trusts tape measure. He's a professional. All right, let's see how we work out here. Okay, so this one here,
Mirror off.
yep, just take a little bit off and we should be golden. All right, here you go. Now let's see what happens. Look at that, folks. That is absolutely going to be perfect. So we're going to have one going from front to back. We'll have maybe one up in here like so. We'll have this one down in here somewhere. These two running vertically. Something like that ought to brace it up a lot better than it was. Put some gussets in there and should be resonant. It'll reduce the resonance quite a bit.
Rock steady.
Rock steady. We're cutting enough for 2 cabinets, and I'm just making sure that they all fit good. There's another front to back. How many of these do we have, the front to back ones?
You only had one in your last cabinet?
Let's do another one.
Okay, so we got 2 right now all together.
Yep. So do 2 more of those. You want this one?
You may only get to the last one. Because I'm out of sticks.
Oh, you're out of sticks? Okay, well,
You can have 3 of them.
let's just do some gussets then.
So that's 2 right there. So you got 2, you got 4 all together of side to side.
Yep.
You got 4 all together top to bottom, and you're gonna do 1 of each, so 2 all together side to side. You
Yep.
just want to turn the rest into triangles.
Yep. I think the rest
Which
of them
we'll
we
probably
just
get maybe 6 or 8 out of.
works for me.
All right. Be right back.
Now we're cutting up gussets with the scrap wood.
So if you hit it correctly, so you're looking, volleyball girls, so your legs look like they're
All right. Just something like that. We're going to wind up with a whole bunch of 45s, and nothing goes to waste. We can use them all over the place inside the cabinets. So these are going to go in here, you know, depending on where I put them. Something like that. Something like that. It all helps stiffen up the cabinet. Just try to stagger them in different places. You know, maybe one of them could even go, say, up inside of here. Whatever it takes to make this cabinet resonant. You say resonance? Resonance. You got it. What's Grandpa building? Yeah. They're kind of hard to hold though because they're small.
You like your fingers.
Yep, gotta keep them fingers.